The silence in the conference room on the 42nd floor was suffocating. 20 men in Italian suits, each earning more in a month than most people make in an entire lifetime, stared at the financial projections on the wall as if they were indecipherable hieroglyphs. None of them could find the source of the $8 million hole that had been bleeding Thompson Industries for 3 months. It was 3 in the morning when Naomi Carter pushed her cleaning cart down the marble corridor. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the gleaming floor as she approached the illuminated glass room. At 27 years old, Naomi knew every corner of that building in Chicago better than her own home. Not that she could call that tiny apartment a home. It was just a place where she collapsed after double shifts, before waking up at 5 in the morning to prepare coffee for her younger sister. Through the glass, she saw the financial experts gathered, some with loosened ties, others rubbing red eyes from exhaustion. The CEO sat at the head of the table, Julian Blackwood, a 40-year-old man whose ruthless reputation preceded any conversation about him. They said he never smiled. They said he could smell incompetence from miles away. They said he had turned a family business into a technology empire through brutally precise decisions. Naomi should have walked past. She should have kept her head down like she always did. But something in the spreadsheets projected on the wall made her heart race. Those numbers told a story she knew all too well. A story of diverted money, of accounts that didn't balance, of small bleedings that accumulated until they became fatal hemorrhages. She stopped. Her fingers tightened around the mop handle as her eyes scanned the columns of data. 30 seconds. That was all she needed to see the pattern that 20 specialists with degrees from elite universities hadn't managed to identify in 3 months. One of the executives stood up, throwing a folder onto the table in frustration. It's impossible. The numbers just don't make sense. It's as if the money evaporates. Julian leaned forward, his fingers interlaced beneath his chin. His voice was low, controlled, but there was steel in it. Impossible is not a word I accept in this room. Someone is taking $8 million from my company. Someone in this city knows exactly how and where that money is going. And you, the best financial analysts money can buy, are telling me you can't find a trail. Naomi knocked on the glass door before she could regret it. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The silence grew even heavier. A black cleaning woman in a worn uniform, interrupting an emergency meeting of the most powerful men in the city. She saw the judgment in their eyes. She saw the irritation. She saw the unspoken question, who does this woman think she is? Julian raised an eyebrow, the only sign of surprise on his marble-like face. The meeting is closed. I know where the money is. The words came out before Naomi could filter them. Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept her chin raised. Or rather, I know how it's being diverted. One of the executives laughed. It was a short, unpleasant laugh. You clean bathrooms, you don't analyze capital flows. Naomi felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise up her neck, but she didn't look away. She had been through worse. Much worse. When her mother died leaving 2 daughters and a mountain of medical debt, Naomi learned that there was no room for pride when you're fighting to survive. When her 16-year-old sister was diagnosed with a severe heart condition, Naomi discovered that she could swallow any insult if it meant keeping Diane alive for one more day. Julian raised a hand, silencing the executive. His eyes, blue and piercing like scalpels, studied Naomi for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. You have 60 seconds. Speak. Naomi stepped into the room, her cleaning cart forgotten in the corridor. She walked up to the projection screen, aware of every gaze burning into her back. She pointed to a series of seemingly random transactions, all marked as operational maintenance expenses. Here. These $15,000 charges appear every second Friday of the month. Always from different suppliers, but always for the same amount. Did you check if these suppliers actually exist? One of the analysts leaned forward, frowning. They're building maintenance expenses. We checked the contracts. But did you check the companies? Naomi picked up a marker from the table, circling 6 transactions. Elevator maintenance. Facade cleaning. Carpet replacement. All of these companies have generic names and addresses that, I bet, don't exist. Someone is creating fake invoices, approving them internally, and diverting the money to offshore accounts. The silence in the room changed in quality. It was no longer disdain. It was shock. If you're enjoying this story, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Leave a comment telling us what you think so far and which city or country you're watching from. Julian stood up slowly. He walked over to the projection, his eyes scanning the numbers Naomi had circled. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with something she couldn't identify. Anger? Impression? Maybe both. Someone check this. Now. 3 executives rushed out of the room with laptops in their hands. Naomi remained standing, suddenly aware that she had crossed an invisible line. She did not belong to that world of million-dollar decisions, of power concentrated in rooms cooled to 22 degrees while down below, on the streets, people like her struggled to pay heating bills. Julian kept his eyes on the projection. 15 minutes passed in tense silence until one of the executives returned, his face pale. Mr. Blackwood, she's right. 4 of the 6 companies have fake addresses. The other 2 are shell companies registered in tax havens. The approvals all came from the finance department, signed by Victoria Chun, Julian finished, his voice sharp as glass. Our chief financial officer for 8 years. Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. Victoria Chun. She knew that woman. Not personally, of course. People like Victoria didn't notice people like Naomi. But she had cleaned the director's office hundreds of times, always observing the impeccable decor, the framed degrees from Stanford and Harvard, the photos of her with politicians and celebrities. One of the men at the table, a burly guy with a gold ring on his pinky finger, leaned forward. Julian, we need to be careful. Victoria has connections. Her husband is a federal prosecutor. She plays tennis with the mayor. If we accuse her without solid proof. Proof. Julian turned, and Naomi saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. She stole $8 million from my company. I want every transaction traced, every cent accounted for. And I want to know who else is involved. No one siphons off that amount of money alone. Naomi took a step back, ready to slip out quietly. She had done her part. Now she needed to get back to her work before someone noticed that the bathrooms on the 35th floor still weren't clean. Wait. Julian's voice froze her in place. He looked at her directly for the first time, and Naomi felt as if he could see straight through her, read every secret, every fear, every unpaid bill. You. What's your name? Naomi Carter, sir. How long have you worked here? 4 years cleaning this building. 6 months specifically on this floor. Julian crossed his arms, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look at her own feet. How did you know? How did you identify a pattern that trained analysts didn't see? Naomi hesitated. The truth was too bitter to share with strangers. But there was something in Julian's gaze that demanded honesty. Because I've seen this scheme before, sir. When my mother got sick, a hospital administrator created fake charges on her account. Small amounts, always below the threshold that would trigger an automatic review. When she died, she owed $120,000 for treatments she never received. I spent 2 years investigating on my own until I proved the fraud. The hospital offered me $20,000 to stay quiet. I refused and exposed everything. They canceled the debt, but the administrator was never arrested. He had powerful friends. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It carried weight. Recognition. Do you have any training in finance? Julian asked. I have 2 years of college in accounting. I had to drop out when my mother got sick. Bills don't pay themselves. One of the executives laughed again, but this time the sound was cut short by Julian's icy stare. Thomas, you're fired. Get your things and leave the building in 10 minutes. The man went pale. Julian, You laughed at someone who, in 60 seconds, did what you couldn't do in 3 months. I have no room in my company for arrogance without competence. Get out. Naomi watched Thomas stand up on trembling legs and leave the room. Part of her felt sorry for him. Another part, smaller and darker, felt satisfaction. Julian turned his attention back to her. Naomi Carter, as of now you no longer work as a cleaner. I'm hiring you as a special internal audit consultant. Your salary will be $12,000 a month. You'll have unrestricted access to all the company's financial files. And you're going to help me find out exactly how many people are stealing from me. Naomi's world seemed to tilt on its axis. $12,000 per month. That was more than she earned in an entire year. It meant paying the bills. It meant taking Diane to real doctors, not just emergency rooms at public hospitals. It meant maybe, just maybe, sleeping through an entire night without the terror of waking up to an eviction notice. I accept. The words came out before her brain could fully process the magnitude of the change. Julian nodded once, decisive. Good. You start tomorrow at 8 in the morning. For now, go home. Rest. You'll need it. When Naomi left the room, her hands were shaking. In the elevator alone, she finally allowed the tears to fall. Not from sadness. From relief. From terror. From hope. She could hardly believe that 20 minutes earlier she had been pushing a cleaning cart, and now she had completely changed the course of her life. What she didn't know was that Victoria Chun had already been warned, and that women like Victoria didn't give up $8 million without a fight, and that the fight was only just beginning. Naomi arrived home at 4:30 in the morning to find Diane awake in the living room, wrapped in 3 blankets despite the heater being on. Her younger sister looked smaller than her 16 years, her pale face contrasting with her dark curly hair. Are you okay? Naomi dropped her bag and rushed to the couch. I just couldn't sleep. My chest was tight again. Diane gave a weak smile. But it passed. Tell me about your day. Did anything interesting happen? Naomi looked at her sister, at the tiny apartment where they lived, at the bills stacked on the coffee table. How could she explain that in a single night, everything had changed? Diane, I need to tell you something. And you need to promise you won't freak out. 3 hours later, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't fit properly and shoes that hurt her feet, Naomi entered the Thompson Industries building through the main entrance. Not through the back service door. Not pushing a cleaning cart. As an employee. The receptionist looked at her with suspicion until Naomi showed the temporary badge that had been left for her. The elevator took her to the 42nd floor, where an assistant was waiting. Miss Carter? Please come with me. Mr. Blackwood prepared an office for you. Office. Naomi had an office. With windows overlooking Lake Michigan, a polished wooden desk, and a state-of-the-art computer. It was smaller than the others, but it was hers. The files you requested are all loaded into the system. You have full access. The assistant hesitated. Miss Carter, I need to warn you of something. Victoria Chun has not yet been formally charged. She is in the building today. And she knows you are the one who uncovered her. Naomi felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she nodded. Thank you for the warning. Alone, she sat down and began to work. Numbers were her native language. While other children learned to read stories, Naomi learned to read bank statements to help her mother. While teenagers went out on weekends, she audited medical bills looking for errors that might save a few dollars. It took Naomi 3 days to map the full extent of the fraud. It wasn't just 8 million. It was 14. And Victoria wasn't alone. There was a junior accountant, 2 project managers, and most shocking of all, the vice president of operations. For people in positions of trust, systematically bleeding the company for 2 years. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as Naomi was finishing her report, Victoria Chun appeared at the door of her office. She was exactly as Naomi imagined powerful women should be: impeccable gray suit, black hair cut into a sophisticated bob, perfectly done nails. But there was something hard in her eyes. So you're the new sensation. Victoria walked in without being invited, closing the door behind her. The cleaning woman who turned detective. Naomi saved her document and stood up, keeping the desk between them. Director Chen. Can I help you with something? You can, actually. You can stop playing auditor and go back to your place. Victoria's voice was low, dangerous. You don't understand the world you just stepped into. You don't understand the rules. Julian Blackwood uses people and discards them when they're no longer useful. Do you think you're special? That he actually cares about you? I don't know if he cares about me. But I know you stole millions of dollars from his company. And I know exactly how you did it. Victoria took a step forward, and Naomi saw something dangerous cross her face. Do you have any idea who I am? The people I know? I can turn your life into hell. I can make you lose this job, your home, custody of your sick little sister. I can make you wish you had never walked into that conference room. Naomi felt fear. It would be a lie to say she didn't. But she also felt anger. Anger built up from years of being invisible, of being treated as less than nothing, of watching people like Victoria have everything while people like her mother died because they couldn't afford treatment. Do whatever you want. But the report is already with Mr. Blackwood. And I have copies in 3 different places. You can destroy me, but you can't erase what I discovered. Victoria stood still for a long moment, then smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile. You think you've uncovered everything, don't you? Poor child. You have no idea how deep the hole is that you've just fallen into. She left, leaving the door open. Naomi sat back down, her hands shaking. She picked up the phone and called Julian. We need to talk. Urgently. An hour later, in the conference room, Naomi presented her full report. Julian listened in silence, his face a mask of absolute control. But she saw the cold fury in his eyes when she revealed the vice president's involvement. Robert too. Julian said, more to himself. He's worked with me for 15 years. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood. Don't be. Julian stood up. You did exactly what I asked. And you did it better than I expected. I'll contact our lawyers immediately. By the end of the week, everyone involved will be facing criminal charges. Naomi should have felt victorious. But all she felt was a weight in her chest and a growing certainty that Victoria Chun had been right about one thing. She had no idea how deep the hole was that she had fallen into. The bomb exploded on Friday morning. Not literally, but the effect was the same. Naomi arrived at the office to find security guards escorting Victoria Chun, Robert Hayes, and the other 2 involved out of the building in handcuffs. News cameras surrounded the main entrance. The scandal was in every newspaper. But what should have been a moment of victory quickly turned into a nightmare. Naomi was reviewing some final documents when her assistant rushed in, her face white as paper. Miss Carter, you need to see this now. On the computer, a series of emails. All sent from Naomi's account. All containing confidential Thompson Industries information being offered to competing companies. Dates, times, attachments with proprietary data. There were even messages negotiating prices. That wasn't me. Naomi felt panic rise in her throat. I never sent those emails. Someone hacked my account. There's more. The assistant opened another folder. Bank transfers. $50,000 deposited into an offshore account registered in the name of Naomi Carter. Security found this 20 minutes ago. The police are on their way. Naomi felt her world collapse. Victoria had said she would turn her life into hell. She hadn't been bluffing. This was a perfect trap. If they accused her of corporate espionage and theft, she would lose everything. Worse, she would go to prison. And Diane would be alone. I need to speak to Mr. Blackwood. He's meeting with the lawyers. Naomi, they're talking about arresting you. There was no time. Naomi grabbed her laptop and began doing what she did best, following the money. If someone had created this false evidence against her, there would be a trail. There was always a trail. 2 hours. That was what she had before security came to get her. But 2 hours were enough. In the conference room, Julian was seated with 3 lawyers and 2 private investigators. His face was closed, unreadable. When Naomi entered under escort, he didn't look away. Miss Carter, very serious evidence has emerged against you. I know. And I know who created it. Naomi placed her laptop on the table. Give me 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. Julian gestured for the guards to wait. Naomi opened her file and began to present. The emails were sent from my account, but the IP address traces back to a proxy server located in the same building where Victoria Chun lives. The offshore account was opened 3 days ago using forged documents. I managed to access the bank records and discovered that the original transfer came from a secondary account linked to the embezzlement scheme I uncovered. Victoria used the money she stole to frame me. One of the lawyers leaned forward. That's circumstantial. It doesn't prove you're not involved. True. But this does. Naomi opened another folder. I hacked Victoria's personal email. Illegally, I admit. But I found her conversations with a hacker she hired to create the evidence against me. It's all here. The instructions, the payments, even the plan to frame me if she were discovered. The silence in the room was absolute. Julian took the laptop and personally read every message. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his expression. You hacked her email. Yes, sir. Technically, I committed a crime. But it was that or go to prison for something I didn't do. One corner of Julian's mouth curved upward. It wasn't exactly a smile, but it was the closest Naomi had ever seen. You're smarter than I imagined. And I already thought you were quite smart. He turned to the investigators. Take this to the police. Add it to the charges against Victoria Chun. And make sure all of her lawyers know exactly what she tried to do. The guards left. The lawyers left. Eventually, only Naomi and Julian remained in the room. Why do you trust me? Naomi asked. After all this, how do you know I didn't create this whole story? Julian stood and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. Because I know people, Naomi. That's how I built this empire. And there's something in you that I recognize. It's not blind ambition or greed. It's survival. It's loyalty. It's a refusal to be destroyed by a system that never gave you a fair chance. He turned to face her. You remind me of someone I met a long time ago. Someone who also came from the bottom and fought for every inch. Who? Myself. That night, Naomi watched the news show Victoria Chun being taken back into custody, this time with additional charges of evidence tampering and attempted framing. Robert Hayes had made a deal with prosecutors, handing over all the details of the scheme in exchange for a reduced sentence. When Naomi arrived home, Diane was in the living room with a pizza box. I saw it in the news. You're like, famous now. The woman who took down the corporate mafia. Naomi laughed, a sound that felt strange after days of extreme tension. It's not quite like that. It is. I'm proud of you. Diane paused. Naomi, the hospital called today. They said an anonymous donor paid for my heart surgery. All of it. And the follow-up treatments too. Do you know anything about that? Naomi didn't know. But she had a suspicion about who the anonymous donor might be. 3 months later, Naomi was sitting in her new office on the 44th floor. No longer the small office of a temporary consultant, but a proper space with a full view of the lake, a team of 6 analysts under her supervision, and the official title of Director of Financial Integrity at Thompson Industries. The case against Victoria Chun and her accomplices was moving forward quickly. Prosecutors estimated sentences between 8 and 15 years in prison for each of those involved. The $14 million had been recovered through the freezing of offshore accounts, and the company not only survived the scandal but emerged with its reputation strengthened by the transparency with which Julian had handled the situation. But what changed the most was something Naomi never expected. Herself. On the morning of Diane's surgery, Julian appeared at the hospital. Naomi was in the waiting room, shattered by anxiety, when he walked in carrying 2 coffees. I thought you might need company. He sat down beside her, handing her one of the cups. Heart surgeries are long. 4-5 hours sometimes. You didn't have to come. I know. But I wanted to. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Naomi finally asked what had been stuck in her throat for weeks. It was you, wasn't it? The anonymous donor. Julian took a sip of his coffee, looking down the empty hallway. You saved my company from financial collapse. You exposed a corruption network that could have destroyed me. You almost went to prison defending your integrity. Paying for a surgery seemed like the least I could do. Naomi felt tears burn her eyes. Why? Why care? I'm just another employee. No, Julian turned to face her directly. You are not just another employee. You are the most honest person I've ever met in this world of corporate lies. And honesty is worth more than any amount of money. The surgery was a success. Diane recovered better than the doctors expected. She returned to school, began smiling more, making plans for the future. Plans that had once seemed impossible. At the office, Naomi implemented a completely new internal audit system. She trained her team not only to find fraud, but to create a culture where fraud became impossible. She reviewed every process, every approval, every point where company money could be diverted. And she did something no one expected. She hired former cleaning staff, night security guards, receptionists, people who, like her, knew the building from angles executives would never see. Invisible people who saw everything. They are the real eyes of this company, Naomi explained to Julian during a board meeting. They are the people who work when everyone else leaves, who clean offices and see documents left on desks, who hear conversations that shouldn't happen. If we want real transparency, we need to value those who have always been watching. The program was revolutionary. Within 6 months, Thomson Industries became a national reference in corporate governance. Other companies began copying the model. Naomi was invited to speak at universities, business conferences, and corporate events. One afternoon, a young woman approached her after a lecture. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, still wearing a cleaning uniform. "Miss Carter, I work cleaning offices at night. Today I saw something strange in the numbers of a spreadsheet. But I'm afraid to speak up. Afraid of losing my job, of no one taking me seriously." Naomi held the girl's hands, seeing her own reflection from months earlier. Speak up. Always speak up. Because your perspective, your honesty, your unique, is worth more than 100 diplomas hanging on walls. Don't let anyone make you believe you are invisible. Don't let anyone make you believe your voice doesn't matter. That night, Naomi returned home, not to the tiny apartment with broken heating, but to a comfortable house where Diane had her own room and space to study, where there was food in the fridge and bills paid months in advance. But what changed the most was not the address or the bank account. It was the feeling that she mattered, that she had proven, to herself and to the world, that she was worth being seen. Julian had been right about one thing: honesty was worth more than money. But Naomi learned something even more important: the courage to use your voice was worth more than both. Because in the end, it wasn't 20 specialists who failed. It was 20 people who forgot to look beyond their own privileges, who couldn't see what was obvious because they had never needed to survive in a world where every number, every cent, every detail meant the difference between eating or going hungry. And it was an invisible woman who changed everything simply by refusing to remain silent. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Leave a comment telling us what you thought of this incredible journey and which city or country you're watching from. Your story could be the next one we